The footage was 47 seconds long. That's all it took to destroy a man's entire career, expose his attorney, and blow open a fraud case that landed in federal court. 47 seconds of a lawyer, a licensed attorney, standing inside my bedroom at 11 p.m., going through my private documents while my children slept down the hall. I watched it once, then I called my lawyer and said, "We need to talk right now." Derek never screamed. That was the thing nobody understood when I tried to explain what our marriage actually felt like from the inside. People hear controlling husband and they picture broken dishes and slammed doors. Derek was quieter than that, scarier than that. He controlled everything with a calm voice and a half smile, like he was doing me a favor just by explaining how wrong I was. Money was his first language, not in a generous way, in an ownership way. When we bought our home in Denver, I contributed every dollar I had saved over 4 years working as a dental hygienist. My name was on that mortgage just as much as his. But Derek talked about that house like he'd built it with his own hands from raw lumber. My house, my investment, my decision. I stopped correcting him somewhere around year 3, because correcting Derek always cost more than it was worth. We had 2 kids, Theo, who was 9, and Priya, who had just turned 7. They were the reason I stayed longer than I should have. I told myself the usual lies, that stability mattered more than my own quiet misery, that Derek was a good father even if he was a suffocating husband, that things would somehow soften with time. They didn't soften. They calcified. The emotional affair I discovered wasn't even dramatic. It was a series of texts I wasn't supposed to see, a name that appeared too many times, a tone that was nothing like the way he ever spoke to me. I didn't cry when I found out. I just sat on the edge of our bed for a long time, staring at the carpet, feeling something close to relief, like a diagnosis you already knew was coming. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning in March. By Thursday evening, Derek had already called an attorney. Not a mediator, not a counselor, an attorney. His name was Harlan Briggs, and I would learn exactly who that man was later. But that Thursday, when Derek came home and looked at me across the kitchen and said, "You'll get what I decide you get, Mila," something shifted in my chest. Not fear. Something colder than fear. I just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go. The first account freeze happened on a Monday. I found out the way you find out about most financial betrayals, standing at a grocery store checkout, kids beside me, cart full, card declined. I called the bank from the parking lot while Theo and Priya sat in the back seat asking if we were still getting cereal. The customer service rep told me the joint account had been flagged and restricted. Derek had called that morning and initiated it. Perfectly legal, she said. Nothing we can do, she said. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Harlan Briggs wasted no time making his presence felt. Within the first 2 weeks of filing, I was receiving paperwork that felt less like legal correspondence and more like psychological warfare. Documents demanding financial disclosures I'd already submitted. Letters challenging my right to remain in the home during proceedings. One filing actually suggested that because I worked part-time hours during Priya's early years, my contribution to the marital estate was minimal. I read that line 3 times. 4 years of savings, my signature on that mortgage, a decade of holding that household together. Minimal. I called my attorney, Renata, so angry I could barely form sentences. Then came the walkthroughs. The first time, I was at work. My neighbor Claudette, a retired school teacher who missed nothing on our street, called me at noon on a Wednesday. Her voice was careful, the way people get when they're about to tell you something they know will hurt. She said 2 men in dress shirts had been inside my house for almost an hour. She'd seen them through the front window, taking photographs, opening closets. One of them had a clipboard. I left work early, drove home shaking, and found nothing disturbed. But the air inside felt different. Invaded. Like someone had gone through my underwear drawer and put everything back almost right. Derek's explanation was delivered via text, 4 words, routine appraisal, calm down, no heads up, no courtesy. My children's home treated like a property he was already mentally liquidating. That night, after Theo and Priya were in bed, I opened my laptop and spent 40 minutes reading reviews on Amazon. I bought a small indoor security camera for $39.89. I almost didn't. I kept thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just how ugly divorces work. Maybe Renata will handle it. I placed the camera on the bookshelf in my home office, angled toward the desk where I kept physical copies of every financial document. Mortgage papers, tax returns, account statements, the folder Renata had told me to guard carefully. I positioned it behind a small plant so it wasn't obvious. I turned it on. I almost felt silly doing it. I told myself if nothing happened in 2 weeks, I'd return it. Something happened in 6 days. It was a Tuesday night. I'd taken the kids to my sister's place for dinner and we'd stayed later than planned. Priya fell asleep on the couch and I didn't want to wake her. We got home close to midnight. The house was dark, everything looked untouched, and I was too tired to check anything. I put both kids to bed, brushed my teeth, and fell asleep almost instantly. I checked the camera footage the next morning while the kids ate breakfast. The motion detection had triggered at 11:14 p.m. I clicked on the timestamp with one hand, coffee cup in the other, completely unprepared for what I was about to see. Derek walking into my home office, alone, going directly to my desk like he knew exactly what he was looking for. Opening my filing drawer, pulling out folders, photographing pages with his phone, one after another, methodical, unhurried, like a man who had done this before or knew he wouldn't get caught. He was in that room for 19 minutes. Then he left. The front door closed at 11:33 p.m. He still had a key. I set my coffee down very carefully so I wouldn't drop it. Renata called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was in the school pickup line. I remember that detail precisely because I had the radio on, some cheerful pop song, and her voice on the other end was so measured and careful that I turned the radio off immediately. Renata was not a careful woman by nature. She was direct, fast-talking, the kind of attorney who finished your sentences because she'd already processed where you were going. When she got careful, it meant something was wrong in a way she hadn't encountered before. She told me to pull over before she continued. I did. I pulled into a bank parking lot 2 blocks from the school and sat there with the engine running. She said she'd received notification that morning from the county recorder's office, something her paralegal flagged as part of routine monitoring on active divorce cases. Our house, the Denver property, the home where my children slept and where I had lived for 7 years, had been transferred via a quitclaim deed and sold. The sale had closed 4 days ago. I was not listed as a consenting party. My signature appeared on the transfer documents. I had never signed anything. The world didn't spin the way people describe shock. It went very still. The parking lot, the other cars, the sound of the engine, everything just stopped registering properly. I heard myself ask Renata to repeat what she'd said, not because I hadn't understood, but because some part of me needed to hear it twice to accept that a human being had actually done this. She repeated it. Same words, same careful tone. Forged signature, completed sale, done. I drove to pick up Theo and Priya on autopilot. I smiled at them in the rearview mirror. I asked about their days. Priya had gotten a sticker for her math worksheet. Theo's soccer practice was moved to Friday. I nodded at all of it, while something inside me was completely, utterly shattered. I fed them dinner. I helped with homework. I gave baths and read half a chapter of Theo's book and tucked Priya in with her rabbit stuffed animal that she'd had since she was 18 months old. I did every single normal thing. Then I closed their bedroom doors, walked to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the camera app. I needed to see if there was more footage I hadn't reviewed carefully enough. There was. I had checked the Tuesday night clip and stopped there because Derek's face was clear, the behavior was damning, and I thought that was the evidence. I hadn't scrolled back further. I hadn't checked the 2 days before that. When I did, when I clicked on the Sunday night timestamp, 4 days before I'd even thought to look, I stopped breathing for a moment. Because it wasn't Derek this time. It was a man I recognized from a photograph Renata had shown me early in the proceedings, a professional headshot from a law firm website. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, always photographed in a charcoal suit, Harlan Briggs, Derek's attorney, standing inside my home office at 9:47 p.m. on a Sunday night while I had been across town at a friend's birthday dinner, while my kids had been with Derek for his court-ordered overnight. He wasn't browsing, he wasn't curious. He moved through that room like a surgeon, precise, purposeful, completely calm. He photographed specific documents. He opened the mortgage folder, spent 4 minutes on it, closed it carefully. He picked up the folder containing my financial disclosures, the ones I'd submitted to the court, and compared them against something he'd pulled from his own bag. A licensed attorney, inside my home without my knowledge or consent, handling documents that were active in ongoing legal proceedings. The timestamp on his visit was 3 weeks before the sale closed. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned from the beginning. I watched the clip 4 times. Then I sat in the silence of my kitchen. Kids asleep, house dark, Denver night pressing against the windows, and I felt something move through me that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite grief. It was clarity, the terrifying, crystalline clarity of a woman who finally understands exactly what was done to her, exactly who did it, and exactly what she is going to do next. I picked up my phone. I texted Renata. I need you to see something, tonight if possible. I have footage of Harlan Briggs inside my home. She responded in 4 minutes. I'm coming over. Renata sat at my kitchen table until almost 2 a.m. She watched every clip twice, took timestamps, photographed the screen with her own phone, and said almost nothing the entire time. That silence from her was more validating than anything she could have spoken out loud, because Renata always had something to say. When she finally closed the laptop and looked at me across the table, her expression wasn't sympathetic. It was something harder than sympathy, something that looked a lot like fury being carefully managed behind professional eyes. She said, "Mila, this is not a divorce case anymore." I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and said, "I know." We filed an emergency motion the next morning to halt any further action on the property and to preserve all evidence. Renata contacted a colleague who specialized in real estate fraud, a woman named Dorothea, sharp and relentless, who took one look at the deed transfer documents and identified 3 specific irregularities that a standard review would have missed entirely. The notary stamp on my forged signature belonged to a woman who had notarized 11 other documents for Harlan Briggs's firm in the past 14 months. 11. Renata said that number quietly, like she was still processing it herself. This wasn't Derek improvising. This was infrastructure. I didn't tell Derek I had the footage. I want to be honest about that decision because it was deliberate and it was cold, and I don't regret it for a single second. Every instinct in me wanted to call him and let him hear in my voice that I knew everything. But Renata had been very clear: say nothing, change nothing, let him believe he had won. So I did. I went to work. I came home. I made lunches. I exchanged custody texts with Derek about pickup times and soccer cleats and Priya's upcoming dentist appointment. I was polite. I was unremarkable. And the entire time, Renata and Dorothea were building a case that was going to take his entire world apart. The confrontation I hadn't planned happened on a Wednesday afternoon in the school parking lot. I was waiting by my car when Derek pulled up, and something about seeing him climb out of his car so casually, so completely unbothered, something about the way he checked his phone before he even looked up, it broke the careful container I'd been holding everything inside for 2 weeks. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked directly to him and said his name once, and when he looked up I said, "I know about the deed. I know about Harlan, and I have everything on camera." His face moved through several expressions in about 3 seconds. Surprise first, then calculation. Then, and this is the part I will never forget, a slow, deliberate smile. He said, "Prove it in court, Mila. Good luck with that." That smile, that specific smile, was the thing that removed every last trace of doubt or guilt or the quiet grief I'd been carrying about the end of our marriage. I looked at him standing there in that school parking lot, so certain that he had outmaneuvered me, so confident that his attorney and his forged documents and his careful planning had put him beyond consequence, and I felt nothing soft toward him. Not one thread of the woman I used to be, who made excuses for his coldness and talked herself out of her own instincts for 11 years. She was completely gone. I nodded once, got in my car, drove directly to Renata's office, and handed her the SD card from the camera. The hearing was 6 weeks later. I had spent those 6 weeks being interviewed by an investigator from the state bar, giving a recorded statement to a detective from the financial crimes unit, and sitting through 4 separate legal consultations. I had also, quietly and without telling anyone except my sister, started looking at apartments. Small ones, just for me and the kids, because I had accepted something important. I didn't want that house back. That house had Derek's fingerprints all over it in ways that had nothing to do with the break-in. I wanted out of every space he had ever claimed ownership over. I wanted something that was only ever mine. When I walked into that courtroom, I was wearing a gray blazer I'd bought specifically for that day, not because I thought appearance would sway anything. Renata had footage, documentation, and a forensic analysis of the notary stamps. The case was built. I wore it because I needed to feel like myself. Settled, solid, like a woman who knew exactly where she stood. The footage played on a screen mounted near the judge's bench. 47 seconds of Harlan Briggs moving through my home office at 9:47 p.m. Then 19 minutes of Derek at my desk. The courtroom was very quiet while it played. Derek sat at the opposite table and did not look at the screen once. His new attorney, Harlan Briggs, had been immediately removed from the case the moment the bar complaint was filed, stared at the footage with an expression I can only describe as someone watching a car accident they cannot stop. The judge watched every second without blinking. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I sat with my hands folded on the table in front of me, and I watched that screen, and I thought about Priya's rabbit stuffed animal, and Theo asking about cereal in a grocery store parking lot, and 4 years of savings and roses I'd planted with my bare hands. I thought about every moment I'd talked myself out of my own instincts, and I thought about a $39 camera I almost didn't buy. The judge didn't wait long. That was the first thing Renata told me afterward, that in her 22 years of family and civil litigation, she had rarely seen a ruling move with that kind of speed and decisiveness. Within 72 hours of the hearing, the quick sale deed transfer was declared legally void. Fraudulent execution, the order read, obtained through forgery and material misrepresentation. Every word of that ruling felt like something being surgically removed from my chest, something that had been lodged there since the moment I'd sat in that bank parking lot listening to Renata's careful voice tell me my home had been stolen. The buyer, a man named Prescott, who Dorothea had identified early in her investigation as a longtime associate of Harlan Briggs, someone who had participated in at least 2 previous distressed property schemes in Colorado, was ordered to vacate within 30 days. He tried to fight it. His attorney filed 2 separate motions arguing good faith purchase protections. Both were denied within a week. Dorothea called me after the second denial and said simply, "He's out." I was standing in the break room at work when she said it, and I had to press my back against the wall and breathe for a moment before I could respond. Derek was ordered to pay the full appraised market value of the home, plus damages, a number that included legal fees, the cost of the fraudulent transaction, and compensatory damages for what the court termed deliberate financial sabotage during active divorce proceedings. The total figure was something I had not allowed myself to hope for because hoping felt dangerous. When Renata read it to me over the phone, I wrote it down on a sticky note and stared at it for a long time. It was more than the house was worth, significantly more. Derek, who had spent 11 years talking about that house like it was solely his empire, was ordered to financially account for every dollar of what he'd tried to steal. But the piece that landed differently, the piece that felt less like victory and more like something being corrected in the universe, was Harlan Briggs. The state bar investigation that Renata had initiated the night she sat at my kitchen table moved with a thoroughness that surprised even her. The forensic review of the notary stamps alone opened investigations into 9 additional cases where Briggs had represented clients in contentious asset disputes. 9 other families, 9 other sets of documents that were now being re-examined. The bar suspended his license within weeks of our hearing and opened formal disbarment proceedings shortly after. A man who had spent decades operating in courtrooms, using his position and his credentials as both a weapon and a shield, was being systematically stripped of everything that position had given him. Derek's girlfriend, a woman named Sasha who had been carefully kept out of the proceedings until Dorothea subpoenaed her financial records, turned out to have been holding 2 transferred accounts in her name that contained marital assets Derek had been quietly moving for months before I even filed. She hadn't volunteered this information. She'd been storing it, presumably believing the divorce would resolve before anyone looked closely enough. The subpoena changed that calculation entirely. Those assets were recovered and factored into the final settlement. Sasha, from what my sister told me later, stopped returning Derek's calls shortly after her deposition. I felt no satisfaction about that specifically. But I didn't feel sorry either. The fraud case was referred to the district attorney's office. I want to be precise about this because I think people imagine courtroom justice as a single clean moment, a gavel coming down, a verdict, an ending. It isn't like that. The criminal referral meant the process was continuing, extending beyond my divorce proceedings into territory that would follow Derek's record regardless of what he negotiated or paid. His attorney entered preliminary discussions about a plea arrangement. I was not part of those discussions, and I didn't need to be. Renata kept me informed at each stage, but I had made a deliberate decision somewhere around the 4th week after the hearing to stop measuring my recovery by what was happening to Derek. The legal machinery was moving. It would do what it would do. I had already started living differently. I signed the lease on a two-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of Denver on a Saturday morning in early autumn. Theo helped me carry boxes. Priya arranged her stuffed animals on her new windowsill with the focused seriousness she brought to everything important. The apartment had big south-facing windows and afternoon light that came in warm and clean and belonged to nobody but us. I stood in the empty living room after the kids had gone to sleep that first night, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and I thought, this is mine, every square foot of it. No forged signatures, no hidden accounts, no man deciding what I deserved, just mine. I want to talk honestly about the aftermath, not the legal part, but the internal part. The part that doesn't show up in court orders or settlement figures, because there's a version of this story where I walk out of that courtroom and feel purely victorious, and I want to be truthful with you. That's not exactly what healing felt like. What it actually felt like, in those first weeks after everything settled, was exhaustion so deep it had its own weight, like my body had been running on emergency fuel for so long that once the emergency passed, it simply didn't know how to idle anymore. The thing I had to reckon with wasn't Derek. It was myself. Specifically, the version of me that had ignored her own instincts for 11 years. Every time I'd brushed off that tight feeling in my stomach when Derek talked about money. Every time I'd reframed his control as practicality. Every time I'd told myself that a man who was calm and quiet couldn't possibly be dangerous, I had to sit with the fact that I had been a highly capable, intelligent woman who had talked herself out of her own perception repeatedly, consistently, and at enormous cost. That reckoning was harder than any courtroom moment. What I eventually understood, and this took months, not days, is that what Derek and Harlan Briggs did was so calculated precisely because it was designed to exploit the instinct most women in difficult marriages already have. The instinct to doubt yourself first, to ask, am I overreacting? Before you ask, is something actually wrong? That self-doubt is not weakness. It is something that gets carefully cultivated in certain relationships over years, so quietly you don't notice it happening until you're standing in a bank parking lot with a declined card and children in the back seat wondering about cereal. So here is what I want to leave you with, not as advice delivered from a distance, but as things I genuinely wish someone had told me while I was still in the middle of it. Document everything from the moment something feels wrong, not from the moment you can prove it, but from the moment your gut registers it. Your instincts are data. Treat them that way. Write dates and times, screenshot texts. Keep physical copies of financial documents somewhere outside your shared home. Not because you're preparing for war, but because clarity is something you give your future self when the present feels too chaotic to see straight. Get your own attorney before you think you need one. Not a shared mediator, your own. Someone whose only job is to see the situation clearly on your behalf. I waited 3 weeks after things started feeling wrong before I called Renata, and those 3 weeks cost me in ways that the settlement eventually addressed but could not fully undo. The moment a financial partner in your life starts making unilateral decisions and calling them practical, that is the moment you stop sharing legal counsel with them. Trust the instinct that makes you buy the camera. Trust the instinct that makes you drive home early. Trust the instinct that makes you check the footage one more time even when you think you've already found everything. That $39 camera did not save my case because it was sophisticated. It saved my case because I listened to the part of me that said something is wrong here, even when another part of me was trying to be reasonable and measured and not cause problems. The most expensive thing I did in my marriage was spend 11 years trying not to cause problems. Theo asked me once, a few months after we moved into the apartment, if I was sad about our old house. I thought about it genuinely before I answered him. I told him that I missed some things about it. The roses in the front yard, the way afternoon light came through the kitchen window, the big maple tree he used to climb. But that a home isn't the building. A home is what happens inside it when the people in it are safe and honest and not afraid. He nodded like that made complete sense to him. 9 years old, and he already understood something it took me 4 decades to fully believe. I am not the woman who stood in that bank parking lot anymore. I'm not even the woman who walked into that courtroom in a gray blazer with shaking hands she was working very hard to keep still. I am something quieter and more settled than either of those women. I am a woman who knows exactly what she is worth, not because a court order told her, but because she found out the hard way, survived it completely, and chose to build something real on the other side. Before I go, I want to stop for just a moment and speak directly to someone specific. Not everyone watching, just one person. The one who is sitting with her phone or her laptop right now, in a house that doesn't fully feel like hers anymore, running through the same mental loop she's been running for months, trying to decide if what she's experiencing is real enough to act on, serious enough to tell someone, bad enough to justify the disruption that comes with doing something about it. I see you. I was you. And I want you to know that the fact that you're still asking yourself, am I overreacting, is not evidence that you are. It is evidence that you have been in an environment that trained you to question yourself first. That is not your instinct failing you. That is your instinct trying to reach you through a lot of noise. If this story cracked something open in you, if you recognized a dynamic, a moment, a specific feeling, please don't scroll past that recognition. Sit with it. Let it mean something. You do not have to have camera footage and a courtroom and a settlement figure to deserve support and clarity and a way out of something that is quietly costing you everything. You just have to be honest with yourself about what you already know. If today's story stayed with you, I'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Every week I share stories like this one, real, raw, honest accounts of women who found their way through situations that were designed to make them feel powerless. Leave a comment below if any part of Mila's story resonated with you. You don't have to share your whole situation. Even just saying I needed this today tells me that this work matters and it keeps this community alive for the next woman who needs it. And if you know someone, a friend, a sister, a coworker who mentioned something once and then went quiet about it, share this video with her, silently if you need to. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone we love is put the right story in front of them at the right moment and let it do what words between people sometimes can't. Thank you for being here, for listening all the way through, for trusting this space with your time and your attention. This community is built on exactly that trust, and I don't take it lightly. Take care of yourself this week, genuinely, practically, in whatever small way you can manage, and I'll see you in the next one.